The frost-bitten wind howled through the canyon as Fletcher Drummond urged his mare forward through the knee-deep snow, cursing himself for taking the shortcut through the mountains instead of following the main trail back to Idaho City. February of 1878 had brought one of the harshest winters Idaho Territory had seen in years, and he was beginning to wonder if his stubbornness would finally be the death of him. His supplies were running dangerously low. His fingers had lost feeling an hour ago, and the pale afternoon sun offered no warmth as it struggled to penetrate the thick gray clouds overhead. He had been checking trap lines in the high country for the past 3 weeks, but the brutal cold had driven most animals into deep hibernation, leaving him with barely enough pelts to justify the journey. Through the swirling snow, Fletcher spotted the dark outline of a structure nestled against the base of a rocky outcrop. His heart lifted slightly at the sight. Any shelter would be a blessing right now, even if it was just a lean-to or hunting shack. As he drew closer, he could make out the rough-hewn logs of what appeared to be an old trapper's cabin, its roof sagging under the weight of accumulated snow. One window covered with a tattered piece of canvas that snapped violently in the wind. Fletcher dismounted stiffly, his legs protesting after hours in the saddle. He led his mare around to the leeward side of the cabin where the wind was less fierce, and tied her to a post that looked ready to collapse. The door hung crooked on its leather hinges, and he had to put his shoulder against it to force it open against the drift of snow that had piled up against the threshold. The interior was dim and bitterly cold, hardly warmer than outside. Fletcher's eyes adjusted slowly to the darkness, and what he saw made his blood run cold for an entirely different reason than the weather. A woman lay crumpled on the floor near the cold fireplace, her body curled into itself like a child trying to stay warm. She wore a thin cotton dress that was torn and filthy, completely inadequate for the weather, and her dark hair was matted and tangled around her pale face. For a horrible moment, Fletcher thought she was dead, but then he saw the almost imperceptible rise and fall of her ribcage. He dropped to his knees beside her, pulling off his thick gloves to press his fingers against her throat. Her pulse was there, faint and slow but present. Her skin was like ice, her lips tinged with blue. Fletcher looked around the cabin more carefully now. There were signs that someone had been living here or trying to. A few empty tin cans were scattered near the fireplace, their labels long since faded or torn away. A moth-eaten blanket lay bunched in the corner, too far from the woman to have provided any comfort. Miss, can you hear me?" Fletcher said urgently, gently shaking her shoulder. She did not respond, her eyelids fluttering but not opening. He could see every bone in her face, her cheeks sunken, her collarbones protruding sharply beneath her skin. This woman was not just cold. She was starving. Fletcher's mind raced. He needed to get warmth into her immediately, but he also knew that feeding someone in her condition required care. Too much food too fast could kill a person as surely as starvation itself. His father had been a doctor back in Missouri before moving west, and Fletcher had absorbed enough knowledge to understand the basics of treating extreme malnutrition. First things first. He needed to get a fire going and warm up the cabin. Fletcher hurried outside to gather the driest wood he could find from under the cabin's overhang, where snow had not reached. His fingers fumbled with his matches, but finally, he got a small flame started in the fireplace. The wood caught quickly, and soon blessed warmth began to radiate into the small space. While the fire grew, Fletcher went back to his horse and retrieved his bedroll and the last of his supplies. He had some jerky, a few strips of salt pork, cornmeal, coffee, and half a loaf of bread that had frozen solid. It was not much, but it would have to do until he could get her to town. He spread his bedroll near the fire and carefully lifted the woman onto it. She weighed almost nothing, and Fletcher felt a surge of anger at whoever had left her in this condition. She could not have ended up here by accident. Someone had either abandoned her, or she had been fleeing from something terrible. Fletcher tucked his wool blanket around her, then added his spare shirt and coat on top for extra warmth. Only then did he turn his attention to preparing food. He filled his small pot with clean snow and set it near the fire to melt, then added a tiny amount of cornmeal to make a thin gruel. It would be bland and unappetizing, but it would give her body something to work with without shocking her system. As the gruel heated, Fletcher studied the woman more carefully in the growing firelight. She looked young, probably not yet 25, with delicate features that would have been pretty if not distorted by starvation. Her hands were raw and blistered, the nails broken. She had been working hard at something or had traveled a long distance on foot. "Come on now, miss. You need to wake up for me," Fletcher said softly, lifting her head gently and spooning a tiny amount of the warm gruel to her lips. At first, nothing happened. Then her lips parted slightly and her tongue moved, tasting the liquid. Some ancient instinct took over and she swallowed, then swallowed again as he gave her another spoonful. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes that were a striking shade of gray-green, unfocused and confused. She tried to speak, but no sound came out except a faint croak. "Easy now," Fletcher said. "Do not try to talk, just take a little more of this. Nice and slow." She managed 3 more spoonfuls before her eyes closed again and she drifted back into unconsciousness. Fletcher was not worried. Her body needed rest more than anything, and the small amount of food he had gotten into her was a start. He kept the fire stoked through the night, dozing fitfully in his sitting position against the wall, his rifle across his lap. Every hour or so, he would wake the woman enough to give her a little more gruel or water. By dawn, some color had returned to her cheeks, and her breathing had deepened into genuine sleep, rather than the near-coma state he had found her in. Fletcher ate a meager breakfast of jerky and coffee, saving most of his supplies for the woman. The storm had not let up, and he knew they would not be traveling today. That was probably for the best. She needed more strength before he could risk moving her. Around mid-morning, he heard her stir. Fletcher set down the piece of leather he had been mending and moved to her side. Her eyes were open and clearer now, though still clouded with confusion and fear. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice like sandpaper. Her eyes darted around the cabin, then settled on Fletcher with obvious apprehension. "You are safe," he said quickly, holding his hands up in a peaceful gesture. "I found you here yesterday afternoon. This old cabin about 15 miles northwest of Idaho City. My name is Fletcher Drummond. I am a trapper." She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see her mind working, trying to decide if she could trust him. Finally, she spoke again. "How long have I been here, in this cabin? I do not know, but I have been with you since yesterday afternoon. You were nearly frozen and starving. I have been feeding you gruel. Slowly, so your body can adjust. Do you think you could take some more now?" She nodded weakly, and Fletcher helped her sit up enough to drink from his cup. She took several small sips of the warm gruel, then a few sips of water. Her hands shook as she tried to hold the cup herself, so Fletcher steadied it for her. "What is your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated, and Fletcher saw fear flash across her face again. "Prudence," she finally said. "Prudence Foster. Miss Foster, can you tell me how you came to be here? Were you traveling with someone? Is there anyone I should be looking for?" Prudence's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "No, there is no one. I was alone." Fletcher wanted to press for more information, but he could see she was exhausted and frightened. There would be time for questions later. "All right, you just rest now. We are stuck here until this storm passes anyway. You are safe with me, Miss Foster, I give you my word." She searched his face, and whatever she saw there must have satisfied her because she nodded and lay back down, pulling the blanket up to her chin. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not leaving me." Something in the way she said it, with such profound gratitude for such a basic act of human decency, made Fletcher's chest tighten. What had this woman been through? Over the next 2 days, as the storm gradually blew itself out, Fletcher cared for Prudence with the patience of a saint. He gradually increased the portions and richness of her food, going from thin gruel to thicker porridge, to finally giving her small pieces of softened bread and bits of salt pork. Each meal, he could see strength flowing back into her body. The color returned to her face, her eyes grew clearer, and she was able to sit up and eventually stand for short periods. She spoke little during those days, and Fletcher did not push her. He kept the fire burning, checked on his horse, and told Prudence stories about his life to fill the silence. He told her about growing up in Missouri, about his father the doctor and his mother who had died when Fletcher was 12. He told her about coming west 5 years ago with dreams of making his fortune, and how he had ended up as a trapper and occasional ranch hand instead. On the third morning, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time. The snow had stopped, though everything was buried under at least 2 feet of fresh powder. Fletcher knew they needed to start for Idaho City soon. His supplies were nearly gone, Prudence needed proper care, and he had to assume someone would be looking for her. "Miss Foster," he said as she finished a breakfast of cornmeal mush and coffee, "I think we need to head for town today. The weather is clearing and you need proper food and rest." "Do you think you are strong enough to ride?" Prudence set down her cup, and Fletcher saw panic flash across her face. "I cannot go to Idaho City," she said quickly. "Please, Fletcher, anywhere else but not there." It was the first time she had used his given name, and the intimacy of it struck him oddly. "Why not? Prudence, if you are in some kind of trouble, I can help, but I need to know what we are dealing with." She stood up, wrapping his blanket around herself like armor, and walked to the window. The sun streaming through cast her silhouette in sharp relief. "I ran away," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "from my husband." Fletcher felt his jaw tighten. "Did he hurt you?" Prudence laughed bitterly. "In every way a man can hurt a woman without leaving marks where people can see them. Gerald is, a respected businessman in Idaho City. He owns the Mercantile and has friends in every office that matters. When I married him 2 years ago, I thought I was lucky. He was older, established, and my father's debts would be forgiven. I did not know what kind of man he truly was until it was too late." "What happened?" Fletcher asked quietly. "He kept me locked in our house like a prisoner. If I spoke to another man, even in passing, he would withhold food from me for days as punishment. If I displeased him in any way, he would lock me in the cellar overnight in the dark. I tried to leave once before, about 6 months ago, but he found me and brought me back. He told the marshal I was having hysterical fits, that I was not right in the head. After that, it got worse. He started saying I was ill, that I needed to be committed to an asylum. I knew if he sent me away, I would never come back. So 3 weeks ago, I waited until he went to Boise on business and I ran. I took what food I could carry and headed into the mountains. I knew he would search the roads and towns, so I went where I thought he would not follow." "But you got lost," Fletcher said, the pieces falling into place. Prudence nodded. "The storm caught me. I had not expected the weather to turn so bad so fast. I found this cabin and thought I could wait it out, but my food ran out after the first week. I tried to hunt to find something, anything, but I am not skilled in such things. I ate snow to keep from dying of thirst, but there was nothing else. After a while, I was too weak to even keep the fire going. I thought I was going to die here." She turned to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "And then you found me." Fletcher crossed the small cabin in 3 strides and took her hands in his. "Listen to me, Prudence. What your husband did to you is not legal, not moral, and not something any real man would do. You were right to run, but we need to be smart about this. If he is as well connected as you say, we cannot just waltz into Idaho City without a plan." "What kind of plan?" she asked, hope flickering in her eyes. Fletcher thought for a moment. "I have a friend, Thomas Carter, who is a lawyer in Boise. A good man, honest as they come. We can go there instead of Idaho City. He can help you file for a legal separation, maybe even a divorce on grounds of cruelty. It will not be easy, but it can be done, and I will not let anyone take you back to that man against your will." "Why are you helping me?" Prudence asked, searching his face. "You do not know me. You have no reason to get involved in my troubles." Fletcher found himself unable to look away from her gray-green eyes. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply, "and because no one deserves to live the way you were living." What he did not say, what he barely acknowledged to himself, was that something had shifted in his chest the moment he found her. Some protective instinct had awakened, stronger than anything he had felt before. The thought of anyone hurting her made him want to put his fist through a wall. But it was more than that. Over the past 3 days, he had watched her quiet strength, her determination to survive despite everything. He had seen her gentle gratitude, the way she tried to help despite her weakness, folding his blanket neatly or tidying the small space. There was something about Prudence Foster that had gotten under his skin, and he knew he was not going to be able to just walk away once she was safe. They prepared to leave that afternoon. Fletcher gave Prudence his spare clothes, which hung on her thin frame but were far warmer than her tattered dress. He rolled up her dress and tucked it in his saddlebag as evidence of her condition when found, thinking it might be useful for the lawyer. His horse would have to carry them both, but the mare was strong and they would take it slow. Before mounting, Fletcher showed Prudence how to sit in front of him on the saddle, where he could keep an arm around her to make sure she did not fall. The arrangement was intimate, her back pressed against his chest, his arms on either side of her holding the reins. He could smell her hair, feel the fragile warmth of her body, and he had to remind himself to focus on the trail ahead. The journey to Boise would take 4 days at a careful pace, longer if they ran into bad weather again. Fletcher knew the route well, and he knew where they could stop for supplies. But first, they had to get out of the mountains without being spotted by anyone who might report back to Gerald Foster. They rode in silence for the first few hours, Fletcher concentrating on navigating the snow-covered trail. But as the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, Prudence spoke. "Fletcher, what will you do after you take me to Boise? Go back to trapping?" He considered the question. "I suppose so. Though after a winter like this I might look for ranch work instead. The trapping has not been good. You have family, someone waiting for you." "No family left alive," Fletcher said. "My father died 3 years back. I have friends scattered around the territory, but no one waiting on me specifically. What about you? Besides your husband, do you have family? My father died 2 years ago, just after I married Gerald. My mother passed when I was a girl. I have a sister, Constance, but she married a merchant sailor and moved to San Francisco. We have not spoken in over a year. Gerald did not like me corresponding with her." Of course he did not, Fletcher thought grimly. Isolating her from everyone who cared about her was classic behavior for a man like that. They made camp that night in a small cave Fletcher knew about, just big enough for the 2 of them and a fire. He spread out the bedroll and insisted Prudence take it while he sat up against his saddle. She protested, but he would not hear of it. "You need proper rest more than I do," he said firmly. "Besides, I am used to sleeping rough. It does not bother me." As Prudence settled into the bedroll, she looked at him across the flickering firelight. "You are a good man, Fletcher Drummond. I want you to know that I see that. After Gerald, I did not think men like you still existed." Fletcher felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the fire. "Just trying to do right by you, miss. Get some sleep now." But after she had drifted off, Fletcher sat awake for a long time, staring into the flames and thinking about gray-green eyes and quiet strength, and the way she had said his name. The next 3 days passed in a strange rhythm. During the daylight hours, they rode steadily southwest, dropping out of the high mountains into the foothills. Fletcher taught Prudence things as they went, pointing out animal tracks in the snow, showing her which plants were safe to eat in the wilderness, teaching her how to read the weather. She absorbed everything with an eagerness that spoke of a sharp mind that had been kept trapped for too long. They talked about everything and nothing. Prudence told him about her childhood, about her love of reading, and how her father had taught her to keep accounts for his small farm. She talked about her dreams of becoming a teacher before her father's death and debts had forced her into marriage with Gerald. Fletcher found himself sharing things he rarely spoke of, his own dreams of one day owning land, maybe running cattle, building something permanent instead of just drifting season to season. At night, they made camp, and Fletcher continued to nurse Prudence back to health with careful feeding. He could see the difference in her daily. Her face filled out, her movements became stronger and more confident, and the haunted look in her eyes began to fade, replaced with something that looked like hope. On the 4th afternoon, they crested a hill and saw Boise spread out in the valley below. It was a proper town, bigger than Idaho City, with actual streets and brick buildings. The Capitol building stood prominently, its distinctive dome visible even from a distance. "We will go straight to Thomas Carter's office," Fletcher said. "He keeps rooms above the law office, so even if it is late, he should be there." Prudence tensed in front of him. "What if your friend does not want to help? What if he thinks I should go back to Gerald?" "Thomas is not like that," Fletcher assured her. "I trust him with my life." "And I trust him with yours." They rode into town as the sun was setting, drawing a few curious looks from people on the street. Fletcher supposed they made an odd picture, him in his rough trapper's gear and Prudence in his oversized spare clothes. But he kept his head high and made his way directly to the modest building on Main Street that housed Carter Law Office. Thomas Carter answered Fletcher's knock himself, his eyebrows rising in surprise. Thomas was about Fletcher's age, maybe 30, with the soft hands of a man who made his living with words instead of labor. But his eyes were sharp and kind, and his reputation for taking on difficult cases for little pay had earned him respect throughout the territory. "Fletcher Drummond," Thomas said with genuine pleasure. "I have not seen you since last fall. Come in, come in." Then he noticed Prudence and his expression shifted to concern. "Is this lady all right? She looks like she has been through hell." "She has," Fletcher said grimly. "Thomas, this is Miss Prudence Foster. We need your help and we need your discretion." Thomas ushered them inside and up the stairs to his living quarters, where he insisted they sit while he made coffee. Then he listened without interrupting as Prudence told her story. Fletcher watched his friend's face grow darker as the tale unfolded. When she finished, Thomas was quiet for a moment, his lawyer's mind clearly working through the complications. Finally, he spoke. "Miss Foster, what your husband did to you constitutes extreme cruelty under territorial law. You have grounds for divorce, and I will help you file the paperwork. However, I need to be honest with you about what we are facing. Your husband will fight this. He will claim you are mentally unstable, that you ran away during a fit of madness. He will use his position and connections to make this as difficult as possible. I understand, Prudence said quietly, but I would rather die than go back to him. It will not come to that, Fletcher interjected. I found her near death from starvation. I have the dress she was wearing as evidence of her condition, and I will testify to the state she was in. Thomas nodded slowly. That helps. Physical evidence is important, and the testimony of a disinterested third party carries weight. But Fletcher, you need to understand what you are getting into here. Gerald Foster will come after you too once he finds out you are involved. He could claim you kidnapped his wife, that you are keeping her from him. It could get ugly. Let it get ugly, Fletcher said flatly. I am not afraid of him. Thomas looked between them, and Fletcher saw understanding dawn in his friend's eyes. I see, Thomas said quietly. All right then. Let us do this properly. Miss Foster, I will need you to write out a full account of your marriage and your husband's treatment of you. Every incident you can remember with as much detail as possible. It will be hard, but it is necessary. In the meantime, you need somewhere safe to stay. Fletcher, where are you lodging? I was planning to get a room at the hotel, Fletcher said. No need. You will both stay here. I have 2 spare rooms. It will be more discreet, and if Foster comes looking, at least you will be in a lawyer's home. That gives you some protection. Over the next week, Prudence worked on her written account while Thomas began filing the necessary legal paperwork. Fletcher found work with a freighting company that needed drivers, earning enough to pay for their keep and save a little besides. It was strange, falling into this domestic routine, the 3 of them eating dinner together each evening, discussing strategy and legal precedents. Fletcher found himself looking forward to those evenings more than he wanted to admit. Prudence was blossoming, gaining weight and color, her mind sharpening as she regained her strength. She was witty and intelligent, with a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard and made him laugh. And she was beautiful, though Fletcher tried not to think too much about that. She had just escaped one terrible marriage. The last thing she needed was another man complicating her life. But it was hard to ignore the way she looked at him sometimes, with something soft and warm in her eyes. It was hard to ignore how his heart jumped when she smiled. It was hard to ignore the way their hands would brush accidentally and neither of them would pull away immediately. Thomas noticed, of course. One evening, after Prudence had gone to bed, he poured Fletcher a whiskey and gave him a long look. "You are in love with her," he said matter-of-factly. Fletcher nearly choked on his drink. "That is ridiculous. I barely know her." "You know her better than most husbands know their wives after 10 years of marriage. You risked your life to save hers. You are risking your reputation and possibly your freedom to help her now. And you look at her like she hung the moon. I am a lawyer, Fletcher. I am trained to observe human nature. You love her." Fletcher stared into his glass. "Does not matter what I feel. She needs time to heal, to be her own person. After what she went through with Gerald Foster, the last thing she needs is me confusing things. Have you considered that maybe you are exactly what she needs?" Thomas asked gently. "Someone who sees her as a whole person, who respects her choices, who helped her when she needed it most without asking for anything in return. That kind of love is healing, Fletcher. How can I even think about it when she is still legally married to that bastard? When we do not even know if we can win this case." "Fair points," Thomas conceded. "But I will tell you this. That woman has feelings for you too. I see the way she watches you when you are not looking. The way she lights up when you come home in the evening. Whatever happens with the divorce, there is something real between you two. Just do not let fear make you throw it away." 2 weeks after their arrival in Boise, Gerald Foster himself came to town. Fletcher was walking back from the freighting office when he spotted a man matching Prudence's description standing outside the hotel, talking with the marshal. He was tall and well-dressed, maybe 45 or 50, with silver threading through his dark hair and the kind of face that looked friendly until you saw the coldness in his eyes. Fletcher's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to walk calmly past and make his way back to Thomas's office. He took the stairs 2 at a time and burst into the sitting room where Prudence was reading. "He is here," Fletcher said without preamble. "Gerald is in town." All color drained from Prudence's face. She stood up so quickly her book tumbled to the floor. "Did he see you? Does he know where I am?" "I do not think so. He was talking to the marshal, probably spinning some story about his poor disturbed wife." Thomas emerged from his office, already reaching for his coat. "I will go speak with the marshal right now, set the record straight before Foster can poison the well. You two stay here and keep the door locked. Fletcher, do you have your rifle?" Fletcher nodded. He had not been without it since they arrived in Boise. "Good. I do not think Foster will try anything violent, but it is better to be prepared. I will be back as soon as I can." After Thomas left, Fletcher locked the door and checked the windows. Then he turned to find Prudence standing in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself, shaking. "Hey," he said softly, crossing to her. "He cannot hurt you anymore. I will not let him." "You do not know him," Prudence whispered. "You do not know what he is capable of. He will lie, he will manipulate, he will turn everyone against me. He will make it sound like I am insane, like I need to be locked away for my own good." "Look at me," Fletcher said, taking her shoulders gently. "I know exactly what you looked like when I found you. Half dead from starvation, dressed in rags, hiding in a freezing cabin. That is not the doing of a madwoman. That is the doing of a woman who was desperate enough to risk death rather than stay with her husband one more day. Any judge who sees the evidence will understand that. But what if they do not? What if they make me go back?" Fletcher pulled her into his arms without thinking, and after a moment's hesitation, she wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her face against his chest. He could feel her trembling. "I will not let that happen," he said fiercely. "If I have to take you and ride all the way to California, I will do it. But I will not let him take you back." They stood like that for a long moment, and Fletcher became acutely aware of how perfectly she fit against him, how right it felt to hold her. When she finally pulled back to look up at him, her eyes were swimming with tears but also something else, something that made his breath catch. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" Fletcher knew he should lie, should make up some noble reason about justice or doing what was right. But looking into her eyes, he found he could not. "Because somewhere between finding you in that cabin and now, I fell in love with you, Prudence Foster. And I know the timing is terrible. And I know you just got free from one man and probably do not want anything to do with another, and I swear I am not trying to pressure you or expect anything. But you asked why, and that is the truth of it." Prudence stared at him, and Fletcher felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Then, slowly, she reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his bearded jaw. "I thought I was imagining it," she said softly. "I thought it was just gratitude I felt, or the confusion of everything that has happened. But it is not. Fletcher, when I think about the future, when I imagine what my life could be like once I am free, you are there. You have been there in every dream, every hope. I love you too." Fletcher felt something unlock in his chest. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. "I want to kiss you," he said roughly. "But I will not until you are free of him, not until you can make that choice without any shadows hanging over you." Prudence smiled, the first real, joyful smile he had seen from her. "That is exactly why I love you. You see me as a person, not a possession. But Fletcher, I need you to understand something. I may not be legally free yet, but in my heart, in every way that matters, I stopped being Gerald Foster's wife the moment I walked out his door. That man has taken enough from me. I will not let him take this too. Then she rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, as if she was not quite sure of herself. But when Fletcher responded, pulling her closer, the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home after a long journey through the cold. She tasted like the coffee they had shared at breakfast and hope and new beginnings. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. When this is over, when you are free, I am going to court you properly. I am going to do this right. When this is over, Prudence said, I am going to let you. Thomas returned an hour later with cautiously good news. The marshal had listened to both sides and agreed to take no action until the legal proceedings were complete. Gerald had been furious, threatening lawsuits and claiming corruption, but Thomas had calmly presented Prudence's written account and the physical evidence of her condition when found. The marshal is a fair man, Thomas explained. He has agreed that Prudence will remain here under my protection until the court makes a ruling. Foster demanded to see his wife, but I told him all communication must go through me as her legal counsel. He is staying at the hotel and making a lot of noise about his rights as a husband, but legally he cannot force the issue right now. How long until the hearing? Fletcher asked. Judge Morrison is due back in town in 3 days. He is riding circuit, but I sent word for him to return as soon as possible. This case takes precedence. Those 3 days were tense. Fletcher barely left the office except for work, and even then he hurried back as soon as his shift ended. Gerald Foster made his presence known around town, playing the role of concerned husband to perfection. He told anyone who would listen about his poor deluded wife, how she had always been fragile, how he was heartbroken that she had been taken in by some drifter filling her head with nonsense. It made Fletcher's blood boil, but Thomas counseled patience. Let him talk, the lawyer said. The more reasonable we appear in contrast to his drama, the better we look to the judge. The night before the hearing, none of them could sleep. They sat around Thomas's sitting room, going over testimony and strategy one more time. Finally, around midnight, Thomas declared they were as prepared as they could be and everyone should try to get some rest. As they stood to go to their respective rooms, Prudence caught Fletcher's hand. "Will you stay with me?" she asked quietly. "Just to sit with me. I do not think I can be alone tonight." Fletcher looked at Thomas, who shrugged. "You are both adults. I am not your chaperone." So Fletcher followed Prudence to her room and sat beside her on the bed, his back against the headboard while she curled up next to him, her head on his shoulder. They did not speak, just took comfort in each other's presence. Sometime in the early hours of morning they both dozed off, still fully clothed, still holding hands. The courthouse was packed the next morning. Word had spread about the case, and everyone wanted to see the drama unfold. Fletcher sat in the front row behind Prudence and Thomas, his jaw tight as Gerald Foster took his seat across the aisle with his own lawyer, a slick-looking man from Idaho City named Harrison Webb. Judge Morrison was a stern-faced man in his 60s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened impassively as Thomas laid out the case, presenting Prudence's written testimony, Fletcher's account of finding her near death, and the physical evidence of her tattered dress. Then Harrison Webb stood up to present Gerald Foster's defense, and Fletcher had to grip the bench to keep himself from leaping over the rail. Webb painted Prudence as a mentally unstable woman prone to hysteria and delusions, who had wandered off during an episode and been taken advantage of by a drifter looking for a payday. My client is a respected businessman, Webb said smoothly. He has been nothing but a devoted husband, trying to care for a wife who suffers from nervous complaints. He has medical testimony that Mrs. Foster has required treatment for her condition. Thomas was on his feet immediately. What medical testimony? This is the first we are hearing of any doctor's involvement. Webb produced a letter with a flourish. From Dr. Ambrose Pierce of Idaho City, documenting Mrs. Foster's erratic behavior and recommending treatment. Fletcher saw Prudence go white. She leaned over to whisper urgently to Thomas, who nodded and stood again. Your Honor, I request the opportunity to question Dr. Pierce directly. A letter written after the fact, likely at Mr. Foster's request, is hardly unbiased testimony. Judge Morrison looked at the letter, then at Prudence, then at Gerald Foster. Dr. Pierce will be called to testify, he ruled. This hearing is adjourned until tomorrow to allow time for him to travel from Idaho City. In the meantime, Mrs. Foster will remain in the custody of her lawyer, Mr. Carter. Mr. Foster, you will have no contact with the respondent. Is that clear? But she is my wife, Gerald protested, standing up. I have every right. You have the rights I say you have in my courtroom, Judge Morrison interrupted coldly. Sit down, Mr. Foster. I will not tell you again. That night, back at Thomas's office, Prudence finally broke down. Dr. Pierce is Gerald's friend, she sobbed. He is the one who told everyone I was having hysterical fits when I tried to leave the first time. He will lie for Gerald. The judge will believe him because he is a doctor. Not necessarily, Thomas said thoughtfully. I did some checking this afternoon. Dr. Pierce has a gambling problem and is heavily in debt, including debts to your husband's mercantile. I think we can cast some doubt on his impartiality. And Fletcher, I need you to testify tomorrow. Tell the judge exactly what you found, hold nothing back. The contrast between Prudence's actual condition and this fairy tale about nervous complaints will be stark. The next day, Dr. Pierce took the stand, a nervous-looking man in his 40s who would not quite meet anyone's eyes. He testified about Prudence's delicate constitution and her tendency toward irrational fears and accusations. Then Thomas stood to cross-examine, and Fletcher watched his friend work with admiration. Within 10 minutes, Thomas had gotten Pierce to admit that he rarely saw Prudence except when Gerald brought her to his office, that all his observations were filtered through Gerald's reports, and that, yes, Gerald Foster had helped him with certain financial difficulties on multiple occasions. So your testimony is based almost entirely on what Mr. Foster told you, and you have significant financial reasons to keep Mr. Foster happy. Is that a fair summary, Dr. Pierce? Pierce squirmed. I suppose when you put it that way, I will take that as a yes. No further questions. Then Fletcher took the stand and he told the truth, stark and unvarnished. He described finding Prudence unconscious on the floor of a freezing cabin, starving and dressed in rags. He described her condition, so frail he could count every rib. He described the careful process of nursing her back to health, the way she had been terrified to return to Idaho City. Mr. Drummond, the judge asked, in your opinion, as someone who found Mrs. Foster and cared for her, did she appear to be suffering from mental instability or hysteria? No, sir, Fletcher said firmly. She appeared to be suffering from starvation and abuse. She was completely rational, just desperate and scared. What I saw was not a delusional woman. I saw a woman who had been driven to such extremes that she preferred to risk death in the wilderness over spending one more day in her husband's house. That tells you everything you need to know about what was happening in that house. He looked directly at Gerald Foster as he said it, and had the satisfaction of seeing the man's face flush with anger. Finally, Prudence herself took the stand. Thomas had coached her to remain calm and factual, to let the truth speak for itself. She did exactly that, answering every question with quiet dignity. She described the gradual escalation of Gerald's control, the withholding of food, the locked doors, the threats of institutionalization. When Webb tried to trip her up with aggressive questioning, suggesting she was exaggerating or lying, she did not rise to the bait. "Mr. Webb," she said evenly, "I understand that the truth of my marriage is inconvenient for your client, but I am not lying, I am not confused, and I am not insane. I am a woman who made a mistake in marrying a man I did not know, who then spent 2 years living in fear, and who finally found the courage to save herself. That is the truth, whether you choose to believe it or not." The courtroom was silent. Even Webb seemed at a loss for words. Judge Morrison called for closing arguments, then announced he would render his decision after a short recess. Those 20 minutes felt like the longest of Fletcher's life. He sat with Prudence, holding her hand, while Thomas paced and Gerald Foster glared daggers at them from across the room. Finally, the judge returned. Everyone stood as he took his seat. "I have considered the testimony and evidence presented," Judge Morrison began. "This is not a complicated case, despite the attempts to make it so. Mrs. Foster is asking for a divorce on the grounds of extreme cruelty. The evidence supports her claim. The testimony of Mr. Drummond, a disinterested third party, is credible and compelling. The physical evidence of Mrs. Foster's condition when found speaks louder than any character attacks from her husband's associates." Gerald Foster stood up. "Your Honor, this is outrageous, Mr. Foster. Sit down and be quiet, or I will hold you in contempt. I am not finished." The judge waited until Gerald sat back down, fuming. "It is clear to this court that Mrs. Foster was living in an intolerable situation. Her decision to flee, while desperate, was reasonable given the circumstances. The fact that she nearly died in the attempt only underscores how terrible those circumstances must have been." Judge Morrison looked directly at Prudence. "Mrs. Foster, this court grants your petition for divorce on the grounds of extreme cruelty. You are hereby released from all legal obligations to Gerald Foster. Furthermore, I am ordering Mr. Foster to reimburse you the sum of $200 as compensation for your personal property left behind and for the suffering you endured. You are free to go and rebuild your life as you see fit." The courtroom erupted. Prudence burst into tears, and Fletcher pulled her into his arms, not caring who saw. Thomas was shaking the judge's hand, grinning broadly, and Gerald Foster was shouting, his lawyer trying to calm him down while the bailiff moved in to escort him out. "This is not over," Gerald yelled as he was pushed toward the door. "I will appeal. You will do nothing," Judge Morrison said coldly. "My ruling stands, and Mr. Foster, if I hear that you have attempted to contact Mrs. Foster or harass her in any way, I will hold you in contempt and you will spend time in jail. Do I make myself clear?" Gerald's face was purple with rage, but he nodded curtly and allowed himself to be escorted out. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Prudence threw her arms around Thomas. "Thank you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for believing me, for fighting for me." "It was my honor," Thomas said warmly. Then he grinned at Fletcher. "Now, as her lawyer, I need to advise my client about something. Fletcher Drummond here is in love with you, and based on what I witnessed in that courtroom, you feel the same way. So my professional legal advice is that you two stop dancing around it and figure out your future together." Prudence laughed through her tears and turned to Fletcher. "What do you think? Should we take the lawyer's advice?" Fletcher cupped her face in his hands, this woman who had survived so much, who was finally, truly free. Prudence Foster, I told you I would court you properly once this was over. So I am asking you properly now, may I court you? May I earn the right to stand beside you and love you for the rest of my life? Yes, Prudence said simply. To all of it. Yes. Fletcher kissed her right there in the courthouse hallway, with Thomas laughing and other people applauding, and it felt like the beginning of everything. They stayed in Boise for another month while Prudence regained her strength and figured out what she wanted to do with her life. Fletcher kept working for the freighting company, and Prudence took a position helping Thomas organize his chaotic filing system and legal library. She was good at it, her sharp mind and neat hand making quick work of months of neglected paperwork. You know, Thomas said one evening, if you ever wanted to study law yourself, I would be happy to teach you. You have the mind for it. Prudence's eyes lit up at the suggestion, and Fletcher loved seeing her excited about the future, about possibilities. But she shook her head. Thank you, Thomas, truly, but I think I want to do something different. I spent so long having my world made small. I want to see things, do things, be part of something bigger. Fletcher had been thinking a lot about their future too. The work with the freighting company had given him an idea. What if we went into business together? He asked Prudence one night as they sat on Thomas's front steps watching the sunset. Freight and supply delivery. There are so many small towns and mining camps throughout the territory that need reliable delivery of goods. We could buy a wagon, maybe two, hire some drivers eventually. Build something together. Prudence considered it, and Fletcher could see her mind working through the logistics. We would need capital to start, she said practically. Wagons, horses, initial inventory. Where would we get that? I have some money saved, Fletcher said. About $300. And with the $200 the judge ordered Gerald to pay you, that is $500, Prudence said, her eyes widening. That is enough to start small. Fletcher, that could actually work. They spent the next week planning, working out routes and potential customers, figuring out what supplies would be most in demand. Thomas helped them draw up the legal paperwork for a partnership. Drummond and Foster Freight, they decided to call it. Though you should probably change your name to Drummond too, Thomas said with a wink. Makes the paperwork simpler. Fletcher looked at Prudence, his heart in his throat. They had been courting for barely a month, but every day he was more certain that she was the person he wanted to spend his life with. What do you think? He asked. Is it too soon? Prudence took his hand. I think that time does not matter as much as knowing. And I know I want to spend my life with you, Fletcher Drummond. I want to build this business with you. I want to build a home with you. I want everything with you. Then marry me, Fletcher said. Properly, with all our friends here, with a real ceremony and a celebration. Marry me and let us start our life together. Yes, Prudence said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will marry you. They were married 3 weeks later in Boise's small church, with Thomas standing as Fletcher's best man and the judge's wife serving as Prudence's matron of honor. Prudence wore a simple blue dress that Thomas's sister had helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that Fletcher had picked himself that morning. She had never looked more beautiful. The ceremony was short and sweet. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Fletcher kissed his bride with such tenderness and joy that half the congregation was in tears. Afterward, there was a small reception at the hotel where their friends toasted the happy couple and speculated on their chances of success with the freight business. I give them 5 years before they are the biggest freight operation in Idaho Territory, Thomas proclaimed, slightly drunk on champagne. Fletcher has the brains and the work ethic, and Prudence has more steel in her spine than most men I know. They are going to be unstoppable. That night, in their room at the hotel that Thomas had paid for as a wedding gift, Fletcher made love to his wife with patience and care, washing away any lingering shadows of her past with tenderness and passion. Prudence cried again, but this time from happiness, from the wonder of being touched with love instead of cruelty, of being seen as an equal partner instead of a possession. "I never knew it could be like this," she whispered afterward, lying in Fletcher's arms. "I never knew I could feel so safe and so desired at the same time." "This is how it is supposed to be," Fletcher said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Two people who love each other, choosing each other every day. That is what we have, Prudence. And I will choose you every day for the rest of my life." They left Boise a week later with 2 sturdy wagons loaded with supplies, 4 good horses, and a detailed route mapped out. Their first stop was a silver mining camp called Silver Creek, about 50 miles northeast of Boise, where Fletcher had heard they were desperate for fresh food and decent whiskey. The camp welcomed them enthusiastically, buying out half their inventory in the first day. Prudence proved to have a natural talent for negotiation and inventory management, keeping careful records and remembering exactly who wanted what for the next delivery. "We need more coffee and sugar next time," one grizzled miner told her. "And if you can get your hands on any fruit, tinned or dried, we will pay extra. A man gets powerful hungry for something sweet after months of beans and hardtack." "I will make note of that," Prudence said with a warm smile, jotting it down in the ledger she had started keeping. "Anything else?" "Letters," another miner spoke up. "If you could bring mail from Boise and take ours back, that would be worth a lot to us. We are supposed to have mail delivery once a month, but it has been 2 months now." Fletcher and Prudence looked at each other. "We can do that," Fletcher said. "We will be running this route every 2 weeks. We will add mail service." Word spread fast. At each stop they made, at each small town and mining camp and isolated ranch, people were desperate not just for supplies but for connection to the outside world. Fletcher and Prudence became known as reliable, fair, and fast. They delivered not just goods but news, letters, and sometimes just a friendly face to people who had not seen anyone new in months. By the end of their first year, they had bought 2 more wagons and hired 3 drivers. Prudence had taken over all the business operations, working out of a small office they rented in Boise, while Fletcher managed the routes and drivers. It was exhausting work, but deeply satisfying. They were building something real together, something that mattered. Their second anniversary found them closing on a piece of land just outside Boise, 50 acres with a small house, a barn, and a creek running through it. It was not much, but it was theirs. "We can expand the barn to store inventory," Prudence said excitedly as they walked the property. "And maybe build a bigger house eventually when we need more room." Fletcher put his arm around her waist. "More room for what? Are you planning on taking in boarders?" Prudence smiled up at him, a special softness in her eyes. "Actually, I was thinking more room for a nursery." "I am pregnant, Fletcher. We are going to have a baby." Fletcher felt like someone had knocked all the air out of his lungs. "A baby, you are sure?" "I am sure. About 3 months along, the doctor says. Are you happy?" Fletcher picked her up and spun her around, laughing. "Happy?" "Prudence, I am over the moon. We are going to be parents." Their son was born in January of 1881, during another harsh winter storm. Fletcher paced the floor of their house while the doctor and a midwife tended to Prudence, terrified something would go wrong. But when he finally heard the healthy cry of a newborn baby, he nearly collapsed with relief. "You have a son," the midwife announced, opening the bedroom door. "And your wife is doing beautifully. Go meet your boy." Prudence looked exhausted but radiant as she held their baby. Fletcher sat beside her on the bed, staring in awe at the tiny red-faced creature in her arms. "He is perfect," Fletcher said hoarsely. "You are perfect. I cannot believe he is ours." "What should we name him?" Prudence asked. They had discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. But looking at his son now, Fletcher knew. "Thomas," he said. "Thomas Drummond, after the man who helped give us this life." Prudence smiled. "Thomas it is. I think our friend will be honored." Thomas Carter was indeed honored, and he arrived 2 days later to meet his namesake, bearing gifts and congratulations. He had gotten married himself the previous year to a school teacher named Margaret, and he brought her along to meet the new baby. "He is beautiful," Margaret cooed, holding little Thomas with practiced ease. "You two have done well. The business, this home, and now a family. I remember when Fletcher first showed up at my husband's door with you barely alive in his arms. Look at you now." Prudence reached for Fletcher's hand. "I look at him every day and thank God he found me. I think about where I would be if he had taken a different trail, if he had passed by that cabin, and I cannot imagine it." "I think about that too," Fletcher admitted. "How close I came to not finding you, to losing you before I ever knew you. It terrifies me." "But you did find me," Prudence said firmly. "And you fed me, and you kept me safe, and you never let me go hungry again. Not for food, not for love, not for anything. You gave me my life back, Fletcher. You gave me this life." As the months and years passed, their lives continued to grow and flourish. Drummond and Foster Freight became the premier freight company in southern Idaho Territory, employing over 20 people. They added passenger service to their routes, helping people travel safely between towns. Prudence proved to have a brilliant business mind, expanding their services and negotiating contracts with the territorial government. Fletcher remained the heart of the operation, the man everyone trusted, who knew every trail and every customer by name. He taught young Thomas to ride as soon as the boy could sit up, and he watched with pride as his son grew strong and curious. In 1883, they had a daughter they named Grace, with Prudence's gray-green eyes and Fletcher's stubborn chin. 2 years later, another daughter arrived, Caroline, who was quiet and thoughtful like her mother. Their house grew with their family, rooms added on as needed. The barn became a full freight depot. The land that had seemed so generous when they bought it gradually filled with life and activity. Sometimes on quiet evenings, after the children were in bed and the day's work was done, Fletcher and Prudence would sit on their front porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. "You ever regret it?" Fletcher asked one such evening, 15 years into their marriage. "Taking the risk with me, building this life," Prudence looked at him like he was crazy. "Regret you? Regret this? Fletcher, you saved my life, and then you gave me a life worth living. How could I ever regret that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," Fletcher said. "That you have everything you need." "I need you," Prudence said simply. "I need our children, our home, our work. I need the life we built together from nothing. That first night in the cabin, when I woke up and found you feeding me, I remember thinking I had died and gone somewhere beyond. But then I realized I was still alive, that someone had cared enough to save me. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I started believing I could have a future." Fletcher pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I fell in love with you that first night," he confessed. "I did not know it yet, but some part of me recognized you, knew you were mine to protect, mine to cherish. I would do it all again, Prudence. Every mile, every struggle, every moment, to have this life with you." In 1890, Idaho finally achieved statehood, and Fletcher and Prudence threw a huge celebration for all their employees and friends. Thomas Carter, now a prominent state legislator, gave a speech about the pioneers who had built Idaho into what it was, and he singled out the Drummonds as an example of what determination and love could accomplish. 15 years ago, Thomas said to the assembled crowd, Fletcher Drummond found a woman dying in a cabin and decided her life mattered. He gave her food, he gave her protection, and he gave her hope. Together, they built not just a successful business, but a family and a legacy. They employed people, they connected communities, and they proved that even in the hardest circumstances, love and hard work can create something beautiful. That is the spirit of Idaho, and that is the spirit of the West. Young Thomas, now 9 years old, tugged on his father's sleeve. "Papa, is it true you found Mama in a cabin? That she was dying?" Fletcher looked at Prudence, who nodded. Their children knew some of the story, but not all of it. They were still too young for the darker parts. But Thomas was asking, and Fletcher believed in telling the truth. "It is true," Fletcher said, kneeling down to his son's level. "Your mama had a hard time before I met her. She was in trouble and she was very sick and hungry. I found her and helped her get better. And then we fell in love and built this life together." "But you saved her," Thomas said, with a child's certainty about heroes and villains. "We saved each other," Prudence interjected, coming to join them. She put her hand on Fletcher's shoulder. "Your papa gave me food and safety when I needed it, but I gave him something too. I gave him someone to protect, someone to build a life with. We made each other whole, Thomas. That is how love works. It is not one person rescuing another. It is two people choosing to face life together." Grace, now 7, was listening intently. "I want a love like that," she declared. "When I grow up." "Then you wait for it," Prudence said firmly. "You do not settle for less than respect and partnership and genuine care. You wait for someone who sees you as an equal, who wants to build a life with you, not just have you in their life. You understand?" All 3 children nodded solemnly, and Fletcher felt his heart swell with pride and love. This was what he and Prudence had built. Not just a business or a home, but a legacy of love and respect and partnership. Their children would grow up knowing what a real marriage looked like, what true partnership meant. As the years continued to pass, Fletcher and Prudence watched their children grow into remarkable adults. Thomas became a lawyer like his namesake, fighting for justice with the same quiet determination his mother had shown. Grace became a teacher, opening a school for girls in Boise and teaching them not just reading and arithmetic, but confidence and independence. Caroline took over the freight business, modernizing it for the new century with automobiles and better roads. Fletcher and Prudence themselves grew older, their hair silvering, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. They remained partners in every sense of the word, still finishing each other's sentences, still stealing kisses when they thought no one was looking, still facing every challenge side by side. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1919, their children threw them a grand celebration. 3 generations of Drummonds gathered, along with friends and business associates from all over Idaho. Thomas Carter, now elderly himself, made another speech about the remarkable couple whose love story had started in such dark circumstances and had grown into something legendary. But the best part of the evening came later, when Fletcher and Prudence snuck away from the party to walk along the creek that ran through their property, just as they had done countless times before. 40 years, Prudence marveled, her hand in Fletcher's. "Can you believe it? Some days it feels like yesterday that I found you in that cabin," Fletcher said. "Other days it feels like you have been with me forever, like my life before you was just waiting, preparing for the moment you would arrive." "I was so scared that day," Prudence admitted. "When I first woke up and saw you there, I thought you might be like Gerald, that you would hurt me. But then you gave me food so gently, you spoke so kindly, and I started to hope that maybe not all men were monsters, that maybe I could still have a life worth living." "And now?" Fletcher asked, though he knew the answer. "Now I know that you gave me more than food that day," Prudence said, stopping to face him. "You gave me dignity. You gave me choice. You gave me back my life, and then you stayed and helped me build a new one. Every day for 40 years, you have fed not just my body but my soul. You have never let me go hungry for love, for respect, for partnership. You kept your promise, Fletcher. You never let me go hungry again." Fletcher cupped her face, seeing the girl he had found in the cabin and the woman she had become, all in the same beloved face. "I love you, Prudence Drummond. I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Prudence replied. "My rescuer, my partner, my everything. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me." They kissed there by the creek as the sun set, two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and had chosen each other every day since. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of their family, their legacy, the love made manifest in children and grandchildren, and a life well lived together. Fletcher and Prudence lived many more good years together, never apart for more than a day or two, never stopping their habit of sitting together each evening and talking about their day. When Fletcher finally passed away in his sleep at the age of 82, Prudence was holding his hand, and his last words were, "I love you." Prudence followed him less than a year later, her strong heart simply deciding it was time to be with her beloved again. She was buried beside Fletcher in the small cemetery overlooking Boise, and on their shared headstone their children had inscribed a simple truth. "Here lie Fletcher and Prudence Drummond. He found her starving. He fed her. He never let her go hungry again. They loved each other always." But the true legacy of their love lived on in their children and grandchildren, in the business they built that still bore their name, in the stories told about the trapper who found a dying woman and chose love over convenience, who built a life and a family from the smallest act of kindness. They had proved that even in the harsh landscape of the Old West, even starting from the darkest circumstances, love could not only survive but thrive. That two broken people could make each other whole. That feeding someone's hunger could mean so much more than just providing food. It meant giving them hope, giving them a future, giving them love. And that was a legacy that would never fade, a story that would be told around dinner tables and campfires for generations to come, a testament to the transformative power of one person choosing to help another, and then choosing to love them for the rest of their days. The wild lands of Idaho had witnessed many stories in its time, but few were as enduring or as beautiful as the love story of Fletcher Drummond and Prudence Foster, the cowboy and the woman he found dying in a cabin, the two souls who found each other in the darkness and built a life full of light.